Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to the Accelerator with Michael Conniff. That's me. We are a podcast dedicated to entrepreneurs, founders, startups, and their connection to angel investors, to venture capitalists, to family offices, and investment firms of all kinds. And we want to remind you we do not make any recommendations to buy or invest. This is for informational purposes only, so make sure to do your own research. Today, we are delighted to have with us Jim Friedrich. He is the CEO of Native Traits, and he is coming to us from the, how can I say this, the mellifluous town of Kalamazoo, Michigan. Welcome, Jim. Good to have you. And what I
Thank you very
wanted
much,
to tell
Michael.
people, first of all, is when we first spoke, you said, well, it's been very busy. You're a farmer. Native Traits is a company that develops what you call ancestral seeds from a agricultural department database, and then plants them based on their traits in the current environment in the real world. So you actually spend some of your time out on the farm, don't you?
Well, not as much as I like. Unfortunately, I'd have subordinates that get to do all the fun work, and I get to do all the financial work and administrative work. But I am the developer of the technology, and of course, I
So
watch
tell
over
us
the
the idea
implementation very
behind Native
closely.
Traits and how you came to start this company.
That's a good question. Native traits in the seed industry is by definition what you would call non-GMO, naturally occurring traits. These are not the genetically engineered traits that we often hear about in the popular press and the newspapers and so forth. These are traits that we discover in strains of corn that are basically in a seed bank. Excuse me, there's over 20,000 strains that are in the corn seed bank that's in Ames, Iowa. So what we have done is develop technology that allows us to efficiently screen these strains and then recover those naturally occurring traits that have a commercial value. In these days, those are things like
Drought
drought
and cold
tolerance
tolerance.
and cold
Tell us
tolerance and
about
so
how
forth.
you went about finding the right traits in this database of so many different seeds that the USDA um, takes care, that maintains. How did you find what you found?
We developed some specialized technology that allows us to screen on a massive scale in the field. So it's real time. It's for the same conditions that a farmer would have, but screen these strains on an individual plant basis. And so that's much more efficient and less costly than doing what the big seed companies might do otherwise. This is a very specialized
And when you
technology
say
that
you
we
do
keep
that
at
in
the
the
trait
field, I
seed.
sort of have a visualization of what that might look like. But how literally do you do that? How do you test this in the field?
Part of the secret is we plant the seeds very precisely and we fertilize them very, very precisely so that we can measure the performance of each individual plant. And then we have a proprietary algorithm that allows us to compare those to the neighboring plants and
And
select the
so by
best
selecting
ones.
the best ones, you mean the ones that are most drought resistant, the ones that are most tolerant to the cold, for example?
That is correct. And here near Kalamazoo, we are in a good position, of course, to screen for cold tolerance and also for drought tolerance because the soils here tend to be very sandy,
And so, how
prone to
many
drought.
different strains did you test before you settled on the ones that you're moving ahead with?
Well, it's an ongoing process. There's no such thing as having the best. We're always trying to improve everything that we have, and most importantly, we will combine different traits and put them together in a package. So that makes
Okay,
it even more
so
unique.
when you have algorithms, you have software that does this. But what's the result? So you dig into this ancestral archival database of seeds, you test them, and what kind of results have you been getting so far with the corn seeds?
Well, we find that with our main most popular trait, which we call EASY, which stands for Enhanced Seed Yield, we can get a boost in yield of about 20 bushels an acre. And typically, a seed company, when they're doing their traditional type of corn breeding, they might get at most 10 bushels an acre. So we can kind of leapfrog. We can basically run a generation faster than they can. But what they do in
So
two
you
generations, we
are
can do in
you are
one
actually
generation. So it makes it much faster.
you're actually doubling
And
the yield. Is that, do I have that right? They yield 10 bushels. You're yielding 20.
we're
Doubling the
doubling
increase. Okay.
the increase. A seed company, when they introduce a new product, it might be 10 bushels better than the previous one, but ours are
Okay.
usually
And what
20
does that mean
bushels an
in
acre
dollars and
better.
cents? What's the real output? What's the real result of that?
Well, in this day and age where corn is the price, with what's going on in Ukraine and everywhere else, the price of commodities is just going through the roof. But last I checked, it was about $7 a bushel. And so if you can increase uh, that by, multiply $7 a bushel times 20, that's $140 per acre that the farmer is getting as a benefit. Uh, and that more than pays for the royalties that we charge. The royalties are usually about $15. So
So you get a
we're
royalty
doing much better for the farmer.
on the seeds that they plant that come from you, that come from native traits, right? That's the model.
That's correct. Although we don't interact directly with the farmer, that would be much too big of an operation for us to take on. What we do is we work with other seed companies, and they market the strains on our behalf, and that's very very common in the seed industry to work on a
And how many?
royalty, a licensing
Yeah.
basis.
Go ahead.
So the
Well, I was
farmer
going to ask
doesn't.
is the nature of these
Go ahead.
distributors. So, do they
No.
really dominate the seed business? Are they kind of the key players here?
There's about four companies that act as what you might call technology brokers. They're not huge companies, but they have a lot of technology that flows through them, and these companies can basically broker or represent us uh, to over 100 seed companies just within the United States. And these seed companies might be very, very large companies, or they may be
Mm-hmm.
family owned, mom and pop type companies. Of course, the latter is very receptive to us because their competition is
And
pretty
to
fierce,
what
and,
degree are
and
your
we like
seeds
to
out in the
help them.
marketplace now?
But this is our first year of commercial production. So we're just now getting it out. In fact, that's what we're doing as far as our financial raises. We're way past the proof of concept stage, and what we're doing now is scaling up the commercial production. And that's just a process of multiplying and
And
adding,
how
getting more and more seed that we can sell.
how do you prove to
And we
the
need to fund that, of
distributors in
course.
particular that you are getting these greater yields? Do you have tests? Do you have data? How do you establish that?
That's a very good question. What we do is we work with either the distributors themselves, because they have a network of what you would call test plots all across the Midwest. So we can do that. And then we also work with contract research companies that specialize in field testing. For example, this year, all total, we'll have something in excess of about 50
With
locations
your seeds in the ground.
running from Ohio to Nebraska.
And
That's
so,
correct.
what does the
That's
competition look
correct.
like? I'm assuming Monsanto is a major player in this. I'm even assuming that GMO type of seeds are obviously a big player in this. You're selling, I guess, essentially an organic alternative to that. Is that right?
That's correct. And we feel like this is an unmet need. The large companies like Monsanto, or which is now owned by Bayer, or let's say Syngenta or Corteva, they have a bit of a conflict because they're trying to sell seeds that are genetically engineered to require the use of their herbicides, which they sell. So the smaller seed companies look at us as a way of offering a product that is not so dependent upon what the big
But
companies
I would assume
might
your
give them to
products.
sell.
But I assume,
So the
Jim,
non-GMO
your
alternatives.
products would also, at least
Go
in
ahead.
some cases, use herbicides. Is that right?
That's correct. It's just a question of quantity. There are ways of controlling weeds that don't require herbicides, and I think that there's going to be a trend towards that. You might have heard of regenerative agriculture. That's a big thing in the agricultural industry this day and age. Anything that can reduce chemical inputs or anything that can reduce costs to the farmer is very, very attractive. And there are ways
We're
of
talking with
controlling
Jim
weeds that don't
Friedrich.
require chemicals.
Jim Friedrich of Native Traits. He is the CEO of an interesting, very interesting ancestral corn company that has delved deeply into the USDA database and found seeds that are drought resistant, that are resistant to cold, and are not as dependent on herbicides as we just heard. Jim, I'm going to shock you by saying, I used to work on a farm. I worked out here in.
Well, that's
It
good.
was in Watermill, New York, in
That's
Long
good. Where
Island,
was
and
your
it was
farm at?
fresh vegetables and produce. It was and still is. I'm happy to say, run by the Halsey family, who have actually been on the same land since the 1600s, and they're still farmers. So it's kind of an amazing story, and they have actually gone from using hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of herbicides to going completely organic, as I understand it, as I'm told. So they've kind of made this transition themselves. But I know enough about farming to know it's not the easiest job. It's not the easiest profession. And do you have an active farm yourself? Do you own a farm?
Yes, we still have the family farm in central Missouri. Uh, my my dad is still well, he's in a nursing home now, but basically he gets out there every time someone will take him. And my cousin farms
Still
the
in the
land
family. That's great. Now,
for him,
how
so it's still in
did
the
you,
family.
growing up as a boy on a farm in Missouri, to pronounce it correctly, how did you get the bug about technology, science, and doing this kind of company? How did that happen?
I started out when I went off to college with the idea I was going to get a degree in agriculture and then come back to the farm. And then just by chance, I got a part time job working for a researcher in the crop science area there. This was at the University of Missouri. And I just fell in love with it. It gave me a chance to do something that was very creative. At the same time, I was still connected to the farm. It was just in a different way. And I might add that it's probably a lot easier to be a researcher
That
than
could
it is to
be.
be a
But
farmer.
what did you do in terms of crop science? How did you pursue that? What are you in the lab with that? Or are you in the field or both?
It's both. What we do is when we discover a trait that's of interest commercially, we use a contract research company that will develop molecular markers for that trait, so we can track the presence of that trait in any line that we are commercializing. And so that becomes very important too. So that's a laboratory thing. We don't do it ourselves, but it's important. It's fairly common in the industry. A lot of the same technology that's used in medical science is also used in
Okay, so this is
agriculture.
interesting. You come by this honestly as a farmer yourself. You're still a farmer. The family farm still is in place and being worked as we speak. How do you move forward with this? What is the next big milestone for you with native traits?
Well, the big milestone is to scale up the commercial production of the lines that we have that contain these traits, and market them through our seed company partners. And that's a process that is critical, but the technology is there. We have good partners that are very good at producing seed. And it's just that we control the seed and keep it within our
You
proprietary
know, the other question that's always going
technology.
to come up because you're taking information, data about seeds from a publicly available database. What's to stop anyone literally from swooping in and kind of doing what you did, replicating or even bettering what you did? What are the barriers to entry in that sense?
Again, that's a very good question. These traits are uh, coded for by multiple genes, so it would be very difficult for someone who doesn't have the right technology, the technology that we have, to basically figure out what is the combination of genes that we have. And then the other thing too is we maintain strict control of the lines that contain these genes, and we only release them to our seed company partners. So unless there was some sort of theft, where someone might go into the field and actually steal it, which of course would be a crime, uh, it'd be very difficult for someone to
Could
get
somebody go into
access
the
to these
field
genes.
and um, take some corn plants and in effect reverse engineer the process?
They
Not
could try,
easy.
but that would be a very difficult proposition because there's so many because there's genes and several genes involved in
So
getting
what
the right
happened? I mean,
combination
these
is not
these
a
are
trivial
you.
task.
We've mentioned they're ancestral. They're kind of ancient strains. Some of them. How come they fell out of use? Do you know anything about the history of these genes, these particular strains of corn before you came along, and how come they've been sitting in the warehouse, effectively sitting in the database for all these years?
Again, it comes down to technology of being able to screen these different strains with 20 some odd thousand of them that would be looking for a needle in a haystack to know which strain to use to even screen for a particular trait. Um, and also, what I did many years ago was I visited different universities around the country and talked to professors there. And it's interesting, a lot of this is not recorded in the
Hmm.
published literature, it's anecdotal. Whereas a professor might know of a farmer somewhere who had a strain of corn that his grandfather used. And of course, if you know what it is that you're looking for, that helps you. because these strains, these old strains, weren't given numbers like modern varieties of corn are given numbers that the seed company uses for marketing, but they would name them the strains after
Hmm.
themselves or the county that they lived in, or a lot of it was whimsical. One of my favorite is Ozark
Wait
Mortgage
a minute.
Lifter. That was the
Ozark
actual
mortgage
name of the
lifter?
strain of corn. So,
Oh boy.
yeah, Ozark Mortgage Lifter. There was a little bit of whimsy involved in the naming, but that's how you have to go about things, because otherwise you really are starting in a
And not to be
difficult
confused with
situation
the
trying to
Ozark
screen a
television
lot of
show that
things.
just concluded on Netflix. That's pretty funny. So, you've started with
That's
corn,
correct.
obviously. What is the plan moving forward, and what is the scalability of this? In other words, is there any? I assume the USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture, has a plethora, to say the least, of grains in its various databases, corn and all kinds of things. Do you plan? Is corn kind of the starting point for you, or do you stick with corn moving forward rather than jump into some other strains and other species? I guess.
That is a very good question as well. The corn is a good way to start because it's a very major crop. It's one of the big three,
Mm.
along with rice and wheat. Um, and so it's a good place to start, not just because it's the size of the market, but also because the genome of corn is more simple than these other crops, and it's been sequenced
Genetically,
many times. And so that was one. I think it
yeah,
was the actual
genetically
first
sequenced. Yeah.
crop that was sequenced. That's right. It was genetically sequenced. And so what you can now do is once we know what the genes are that we've discovered in corn, we can develop molecular probes that you can use in the laboratory. Again, that's scaled up, uh, that you can go look for the same genes in wheat and rice and sorghum. And that effort is just now getting underway. But that becomes a much simpler
So
process because
you're
you
in
know what
effect,
genes you're looking for.
Jim. You're in effect a seed entrepreneur. I think we can call you. Um, is Are you alone out there? Are there hundreds of seed entrepreneurs? Are there many others trying to tap into the public databases of grains?
Not many, really. The universities do some work in this area, and the very large companies do. But again, it all comes down to technology. You have to have an efficient way of
Yeah.
screening the strains. And it might also say that it's not just a question of finding the right strain with the right trait in it, but then you have to get that trait
And
into a commercial
how do you
line,
do that? How do you make that happen?
because the strain. That's a good question. Basically, we let Mother Nature do it. There's no genetic, transgenetic manipulations going on, but we would do the same sort of crosses that corn breeders have always done that are non-GMO
So
type
this is maybe
methodologies.
a distinction other people understand better than I, but we know that there's genetic engineering among food supply, among seed, right? And but you would not classify what you're
Right.
doing as genetic engineering, right? Now, what's the difference? Because you are doing something with genes, you are taking advantage of the sequencing. So, what's the difference between that and what we would call genetic engineering or GMOs, genetically modified?
Genetic engineering, right. Um, GMO type products are always products where a gene that doesn't naturally exist in that species
From a
is
different species.
transferred to that species. The GMO products that are Right. I mean, the transgenic or GMO products that are on the market now contain bacterial genes, which would not be there normally. So that's the key difference, and you have to use genetic engineering techniques to get a
Okay.
bacterial gene
And
into a
in your
corn
case,
plant.
it's corn into corn. It's not corn into shark or corn into shrimp. It's corn into corn.
That's correct.
And what
That's exactly
about
right.
that for you as a farmer, as a a farmer who goes back generations? Why is that important to you?
Well, I think it's interesting in the sense that we tend to get into an argument about food safety and environmental impacts. And those are important arguments. But there's also something that I think is just very intrinsic to us as human beings. We want things that are natural. We don't want anything that's artificial. And if it's genetically engineered, it's obviously not natural. So that I think that subtle thing is oftentimes ignored, but I think that's really the key driver. We always want food products that are natural and not artificial. The
Yeah,
artificial things we don't trust. That's just part of our basic human
I would agree with that, but I think one of the
psychology.
problems is that the word natural, the word organic, those terms have been so bastardized and misused that it's almost hard to define what is. I mean, I think you have defined it very well for us, but I think it's not a simple thing because the language has kind of taken on a life of its own. But you can't do much about that. You can just grow some good crops, right?
That's correct. Although, and we'll see how well it works out. There are labeling laws that are coming into play. Some have actually been in force for quite a few years, where a product that is organic has to be labeled in a way that, excuse me,
Sure,
would distinguish it
sure.
from
There,
a
yeah, that's
GMO type
definitely
product,
that's a, yeah,
so the
that's
consumer can
definitely
tell the
starting to
difference.
happen. Well, Jim, I want to thank you so much for being on with us today. I really appreciate it. We've been on the Accelerator with Michael Conniff. That's me with Jim Frederick. He's the CEO of Native Traits, and he is coming to us live via podcast in Kalamazoo, Michigan, where he is still working the land, trying to develop ancestral corn crops and selling them through distributor networks. And Jim, thank you so much for being with you. We want to definitely wish you the best of luck. Thanks for being with us, I should say, and we want to wish you the best and
Thank you
appreciate
for
it.
having me.
And this is the Accelerator. I'm Michael
Thank you
Conniff.
for having
You
me.
can reach me at Twitter at michaelconniff.com, MICHAELCONNIFF. You could go to my website, also michaelconniff.com, MICHAELCONNIFF. It's great to be here, and we will be back with more of the Accelerator before you know it.